hope all of you are well. How are you guys doing? Welcome to the Quarantine Collective's reading of Klossowski. I'm slowly getting things going today, but I hope everyone's doing well. It's been a long week. But let me start this up in the QC. We'll get moving on this. Such a fun time. Here we go. Boop and kaboom. Oh Lord, what a reading. I had to rewrite and then re-record tomorrow's essay, so I've got editing to do when I'm done with this, and then I've got work to do, because this is not my job. As much as I'd love to say it is my job, it is not my fucking job. I hope all of you are doing well. Thanks, Lone. Doing well-ish. That's kind of, I think, where most of us are. The economy is fascinating. Atlassian, which is an Australian company that you may not have heard of. If you work in software development, you've heard of them. Atlassian's been around for forever, an extraordinary amount of time. And they just laid off 10% of their workforce, which is kind of a max allowed based on laws in the country they're in. So we're in a really fucking bad place economically. That's hardly just only hitting the U.S. Hardly just hitting the U.S. It is a bad day. Is a bad day. Is a bad day. So there's only so much that can be done about that, though, as happens. All right, let's go ahead and make sure things are pulled up. Get these in the right spots. Tiring times. All right. Oh, QC events. Oh God, I've got to remind everyone that everything is 2 seconds. I've got to do the ping to the group. Americans have a thing called daylight savings. Oh, 2 seconds by yearly ping. So frustrating. Start the event there. This is going to be a lot. And when I say a lot, this is very much going to focus more or less exclusively on reading Nietzsche and how Nietzsche is read by Klossowski. Where do I start? At this point in the book, Klossowski has traced this... Oh, the music's still loud. Fair enough. Hey, TJ. It's hitting everywhere. It is... I'm going to be doing a stream hopefully later tonight if I can get the video edited in time. And the economy is just absolutely broken. Absolutely broken. Hey, Organelles. I'm just chatting with the YouTubes. Let me share my screen so you can see the reading where we're at. Let's see. There. Economy is very much broken. It's been an awful few weeks. Awful few weeks. Awful. But our reading today. Let me get OBS out of the way. Sorry, I was a little slow. I've just been new possible contract for work came in. So I've been doing basically overloads on that as I try to get all these videos out, and it's kind of candles burning from both ends. On top of it, I've got two little ones who have started swimming lessons as well as kung fu for Dexter. So that's been a lot on top of new lessons and all kinds of things. It's homeschooling's a thing, and it is a lot. At this point in our reading, Klossowski has basically been tracing like health, morbidity as a diagnostic framework for Nietzsche, right? And we've been building in and around the Silmarie event in Nietzsche's life as this constitutive moment. This is where the eternal return came to him. This is the experience of the eternal return. It's not just pure thought, it's the experience of it. And then he goes on to then try to write about it the rest of his life. And the challenge becomes that as we talk about it, as we work between the different valetudinary states, as Klossowski talks about it, what we're spending time with is the bodily experience that contributes, builds, and for Klossowski can absolutely be associated. This passage, all of this, is going to be spending time in Nietzsche's posthumous fragments that are right around Silmarie, and the commentary Klossowski's going to have around that. It is not the same as most of these other pieces. Yeah, it's going to be a thing. It's going to be a thing. So let's do it. We're going to start here at the top, nice and easy. And then it's literally just like most of what you're looking at right here is Nietzsche quotes. And then we finally get away from it. So it's going to be just it's a lot of Nietzsche. In a posthumous fragment dated spring 1888, Nietzsche is still trying to demonstrate to himself that the supreme values of philosophy and traditional morality are merely morbid symptoms of impotence and non-resistance, and therefore that they are of the same order as representations of mental debility. But since he is also questioning himself, it may be, this is the underlying motif, that everything that he manages to think and to think against the hitherto supreme values is the result of a morbid state. This is why he introduces the first fragment with a statement of principle. I want to go through that, and then we're going to break down the Nietzsche stuff in line with it, because I think that will help us rather than just maybe straight reading through. Straight reading through this could very much be done. It's just going to be a not advisable would be kind of how I'd probably phrase it, if that makes sense. That's goodbye, everyone. New video is excellent. Thank you, Organelles. That one had to be rewritten and re-put up too, so it's a thing. It's a thing. So let's do it. Oop. In a posthumous fragment dated in 1888, Nietzsche is still trying to demonstrate to himself that the supreme values of philosophy and traditional morality are merely morbid symptoms of impotence and non-resistance. We'll get to the therefore in a second. There's a reason I kind of want to stop here. Nietzsche is still trying. There's a compulsive repetition that we're going to be kind of talking about as we go through this, right? It's a significant part of this, but there's a compulsive repetition to what Nietzsche's doing, still going through this, right? The Silmarie experience was supposed to resolve or even transcend health and morbidity as diagnostic. Like the eternal return itself is this thought that can only befall a consciousness in excess of any gregarious type, right? Yet here, in this last lucid spring that he has before Turin, this is post-Silmarie, pre-grabbing the horse and screaming, apocryphal or not, that's the bookends of this. He doesn't, no matter what, whatever the apocryphal story is, Turin doesn't go well for Nietzsche, I think is the sort of easy way to phrase it. In this posthumous fragment, Nietzsche is going to be returning to the same diagnostic labor. So the eternal return, and it's interesting, doesn't really change his vantage point, right? It doesn't give him some stable vantage point that he can adjudicate his own case or see things. That's not what it is, right? That's not what it is. He continues. Traditional morality are merely morbid symptoms of impotence and non-resistance, and, therefore, that they are of the same order as representations of mental debility. But since he is also questioning himself, it may be, this is the underlying motif, that everything he manages to think, and to think against the hitherto supreme values, is the result of this morbid state. There's a meta-suspicion that he's like playing with here. The underlying motif. He's also questioning himself. It may be that everything he manages to think and to think against the hitherto supreme values. The structure that is being sort of built up here is doing a bit of front loading. So as we're going through a lot of this, we can be thinking about Nietzsche from this position of his own diagnostician, his own diagnosis, his own morbidity, his own position in this is kind of what Klossowski's hinting at with this. I'm hoping that makes fucking sense. Really hoping that makes fucking sense. This is what I've taken from this, right? This is a particular structure that is sort of being built against all of this. There's a decadent morality that Nietzsche's talking about that is being critiqued from another position of decadence. Remember the way it was laid out when we were looking at it, the graph, remember? Where is it these days? I think it's all the way over here now. Boop, boop, boop. Remember? Decadence, singular, weak, degenerate. He's making a lot of the same commentary, but he's doing it from that same position or the same perspective. Perspective would be the better word for that, I think. Yeah. So we're going to go through Nietzsche's quotes here with kind of that in mind. There's a lot that's sort of said in this, and I want to make sure that as we're talking about each one of these, and I'm going to just do small paragraphs after small paragraphs, and we'll do it quickly because I want to get back to Klossowski's analysis of it rather than my own, even though I'm going to be kind of cheating and giving hints at what Klossowski's is. I want to try to get through this because Nietzsche's writing is not literally the point. Not here. What is inherited is not the sickness, but sickliness. The lack of strength to resist the danger of infections, the broken resistance, morally speaking, resignation and meekness in the face of the enemy. So there is a distinction he's making here. The distinction is between sickness and sickliness. The way that in his time specifically, sickliness was a constitutional disposition. It was inherited susceptibility, very much talked about as though it was father to son or due to your race, due to this, like this thing. What is inherited is not sickness itself, but sickliness. Sickness is the direct pathology. The way that he's sort of talking about this, right, as we make our way through, and there's a reason Klossowski's aiming at this, think of specifically the way that the sickliness, the broken resistance, what is primary is not a determined content like illness or being sick, but a formal vulnerability, something within a process that is misfiring or misfunctioning, which would be the constitution problem of the thing. Because what you don't inherit literal illnesses. You inherit an incapacity of resistance, the broken resistance as a thing. This is what Nietzsche's sort of getting at. The way he then talks about it and moves right to morality is focused on, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. There's an organic sickness metaphor that Nietzsche's using here, where he's playing at this idea of like the weakness to respond to a pathogen, to an illness, to a sickness, is used and talked about in the same way a Christian moral vocabulary is. That you would talk about humility or resignation, right? Morally speaking, resignation and meekness in the face of the enemy. It still is, the position is the deal that we're talking about, where Nietzsche's writing from. Okay? Nietzsche here is almost performing a division himself, and he's showing that the Christian virtue is moral rationalization. The lack of strength to resist danger of infections, etc., broken resistance. Morally speaking, resignation and meekness in the face of the enemy. I have asked myself if all the supreme values of previous philosophy, morality, and religion could not be compared to the values of the weakened, the mentally ill, and neurasthenics. In a milder form, they represent the same ills. Neurastheny is a weird, God, I hope I get this right. Neurastheny is a weird term we don't use anymore. Like, you want to talk about something that's super, super antiquated as an idea. The idea was like nervous exhaustion, that like your nerves could sort of run out through overstimulation, that your force of nerves, this is a thing. I know it doesn't sound, but again, follow it where it's going, because there's something there. We kind of have a better idea of how this works now, but it was like as if your nerves is run out of its own gas, right? So a neurasthenic is someone who like, they have overextended themselves and their capacities, and so they have become disordered. They have a pathology now. Okay? It is the value of all morbid states that they show us under a magnifying glass certain states that are normal, but not easily visible when normal. Morbid states amplify normal states to the point of visibility. There's a lot of people who'd make a really good killing writing books about this for about 100 years. And it's a pretty fantastic point to sort of consider. When you have reached that point, or you have a point where you have illness, or where the state of X, Y, or Z has sort of occurred as it does, that thing that's happening, what is healthy is sort of accentuated. It becomes privileged. You can see in a disease things that are invisible in health. I mean, this is like the core idea of anti-Oedipus. Like this is not just like some random shit Nietzsche wrote. This is the fucking point as far as these guys are concerned. But to continue, health and sickness are not essentially different, as the ancient physicians and some practitioners, even today, suppose. One must not make of them distinct principles or entities that fight over the living organism and turn it into their arena. That is silly nonsense and chatter that is no good any longer. In fact, there are only differences in degree between these two kinds of existence. The exaggeration, the disproportion, the non-harmony of the natural phenomena constitute the pathological state. This is like going to be a lot to talk through. Do I want to go into like Claude Bernard, who's kind of interesting? So Claude might be a decent way to talk about it. Not explicitly. I'm just sort of saying what I read of him. Claude Bernard worked in a very particular idea that Nietzsche and Klossowski are pulling at here. He wrote this book called The Attitude of Experimental Medicine, the idea, how to study experimental medicine. I think it's something like that. Étude de la médecine expérimentale. And the introduction of that book specifically argues against this idea of the ontological conception of disease, right? Doing that, what he's arguing against, that conception of disease treats illness as a foreign entity that is inhabiting an organism that is otherwise healthy. The problem with that, according to what Bernard is saying, is that there's actually a continuous, I think was the phrase he uses, but quantitative conception of it, that disease is actually normal physiology out of proportion, that it's parts of a healthy body exaggerated. It is a disharmony in the ecosystem of the human body, which is a far more interesting take, especially in the late 1800s. I mean, think about it. So like if health and disease are actually only differences in degree, if it's not, that's an outside invader, and the outside invader is making us sick, which is what people consider to be germ theory, but not actually how germ theory works. Germ theory works by making the body out of whack. It isn't like an invading force the way we think of imperialism or these other things like that. What it would mean is that there's really no external criteria to distinguish health and disease. So the standard for this would always be immanent. It would always be dynamic and variable as a thing, like fundamentally. It would mean the concept of healthy as a vantage point that you can sort of diagnose decadence and debilitation would be internally undermined, that there is no such thing as a healthy vantage point. It would undermine itself within each of us. And of course, in regards to the eternal return, insofar as we experience it as excess of health, we can't really distinguish it from an excess of morbidity. Remember that that's part of the eternal return, part of the vicious circle, the all points, all those things. So there's this really interesting place that this specific paragraph is kind of this aporia of the valetudinary states we're talking about. And Bernard, who Nietzsche is going to be pulling on here for the rest of this, at least from what I said, again, dude wrote a lot. I'm pretty sure this is the one thing that's being focused on in this book and referenced. He wrote a lot. Feel free to add as you want. But Bernard is basically handing Nietzsche these concepts that blow out his own diagnostic framework. He's using Claude Bernard to do this, to take these things apart. And it's sort of a self-undermining as he's doing this. This is his later years writing. I think really had fun doing this. Fun is the wrong word. Fun is the wrong word. But yeah. So he goes on and he says, just as evil can be considered as exaggeration, disharmony, disproportion, the good may be a protective diet against the danger of exaggeration, disharmony, and disproportion. Protective diet. This is not just like a watching what you eat thing. There's a entire medical hygienic sort of thing behind this. It has to do with Bernard and how Nietzsche was writing, just to say. Just as evil can be considered and as exaggeration, disharmony, and disproportion, the good may be protective diet against the danger of exaggeration, disharmony, and disproportion. The thing that's happening here is talking about morality as effectively middle management. It's about administering the thresholds of things. Evil and good are able to be managed by protecting against or as the exaggeration, the disharmony, the disproportion, or protecting against those things. It's basically morality's reactive and negative, defined against excess of various states rather than anything affirming on its own terms. This is a medical diagnosis of slave morality. Like, he's connecting these things, right? He's connecting all of these things. Hereditary weakness as the dominant feeling, cause of the supreme values. In B, one wants weakness. Why? Usually because one is necessarily weak. Nota bene is the phrase he's using. Again, he's at Silmarils. He's writing these things. The Stanford translation of these is exquisite because it gives you all of these notes. They're in the server somewhere. It gives you all these notes on what all of these little fucking little things mean from these fragments. But usually because one is necessarily weak. That's why one wants weakness. Weakness as a task, weakening the desires, the feelings of pleasure and displeasure, the will to power, to a sense of pride, to want to have and have more, weakening as meekness, weakening as faith, weakening as aversion and shame in the face of everything natural, as negation of life, as sickness and habitual weakness, weakening as the renunciation of revenge, of resistance, or enmity and wrath. He's basically outlining the ascetic ideal here, because weaknesses aren't like, again, an outside, clearly determined thing. He's kind of talked through that already. Weakness is instead a normative tasking one gives oneself. One wants weakness because one is necessarily weak. This is kind of what he's laying out here. Weakness isn't just a failure to achieve strength. It systematically reproduces weakness through the way we sanctify and make sacred the idea of renunciation. Again, ascetic ideal. The things in here you can pull from a lot of places. Weakening is meekness, weakening is fake. Meek shall inherit the earth statements, kind of shit that is sort of baseline for most of Christian thought and writing, most of all of these things. Right? And then to continue, sorry, I'm trying to bust through the Nietzsche stuff because it's good, but it is leading to a thing. It's kind of the foundation for what's going to be coming up. So, and he sort of quotes these things throughout the rest of this passage. So we're going to be reading it again and again. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. The error in treatment. One does not want to fight weakness with a system fortifiant. Jesus Christ. I'm not even sure what the fuck. System fortifiant, of a fortified system. But rather with a kind of justification, moralization, i.e. with an interpretation. System fortifiant, if memory serves, again, old-timey medical stuff, but this is like tonics. You fortify yourself against that kind of language that's really popular amongst like the Maha crowd even today. This you drink it and it'll make you stronger against X, right? But that's like the problem we're seeing, right? You can't really get strength through strengthening agents. Not really. Morality has this interpretation of it. It's a hermeneutic of these problems. It's not a therapeutic for them. An illness never gets treated. It becomes renamed, an interpretation. Weakness never gets overcome. It gets redescribed or translated as value. This is kind of, throughout the book, one of the things that Klossowski is pulling back from Nietzsche a lot. The gregarity of code production and how it works. My video tomorrow's on this big time. The abbreviation and interpretation of intensities of our inner experience, of intensive states, get turned into stable signs, the gregarious code. The intensive state is weakness somewhere. The code would rename it as humility, or being empowered in a different way, or empathy, being pathetic. But these are seen as like positive traits, where we have exhaustion, like being overworked or burned out. One might call it serenity. This as an example. These types of things that sort of come out and build into us. It's an epistemological error. It's confusion between levels of analysis because the sign has replaced the state. Interpretation replaces physiology. This is the error in treatment he's identifying. As he goes on, two totally different states confounded. The calm of strength, which is essentially forbearance from reaction, type of the gods whom nothing moves, and the calm of exhaustion, rigidity to the point of anesthesia. All philosophic ascetic procedures aim at the second, but really intend the former, for they attribute predicates to the attained state as if a divine state had been attained. The conflating of these two states is going to be a big deal from here. The calm of strength and the calm of exhaustion are indistinguishable. Right? Does that make sense? So let's say we have have you ever been around, like, I've had a chance to hang around some MMA champions, go drinking with them. They are the, like, over the top, generally speaking, not all of them, but these guys, super calm, like really nice, slow paced, really cool guys. There is a calmness in strength because they literally know they could kill anybody there, like with their bare hands. Like that's a thing they've got. However, well, just say me. I also have a calmness, mostly from being incredibly tired. But these things on the outside, you can't tell the fucking difference. They're phenomenologically indistinct. There's no shift there. But they are actually opposite sort of states ontologically. The excess of force that makes reaction unnecessary. The champion who's not moved because nothing has provoked him that's worthy of that or has hit his eternal reserve. Or the rigidity of depleted force, someone who has completely just spent themselves and has nothing left to react with. These are the same. The aesthetic procedure produces the second of these. It produces people who are the calm of the exhausted because they have nothing left. But the thing is, they claim to instantiate the first. Yeah. All of our life, we're taught, especially Christianity and these other things, they had American values, the good man, whatever it is, to not enact yourself into the world. And you sort of slowly chill yourself back the fuck out. Now, is that because you have strength and you are showing strength of will to do such a thing? Or do you just not have, like, anything to do? You just don't have the passion. You don't have the interest. You're just not really there. Right? There's so many quotes of this that, like, Yeah, this would be the thing. This is a big thing, but it's from the outside, from everyone else's perspective. We confound these two. We fuck with them, and we don't realize that while we're aiming for the former, we're actually aiming at the second, and we fuck up pretty badly. Is that following? Is everyone here? Any questions on that? Any commentary on Nietzsche before we move forward? It's worth taking a moment, because from here it's going to be Klossowski. All right. Everyone's following, I hope. Really hope so. I'm going to do a handful of these in a row. They're tiny little paragraphs, as Klossowski does. And then we'll go back and we'll do and break them up a little bit. What is inherited is not the sickness itself, but the morbid state, which manifests itself in the moral values of resignation and humility. This is what Nietzsche states in the first two paragraphs, but this raises the question of whether or not what have hitherto been the supreme values are not merely pathological travesties. If, after reading the last paragraph of the fragment, we then return to the first, it seems that the fragment includes two contradictory propositions. The first moves in the same direction as traditional morality. It is an evil for the agent to be unable to resist its impulses, to resist harmful invasion of the outside. The second proposition qualifies this lack of resistance, the strength of broken resistance, as resignation and humility. From what point of view? Actually, I don't think I have to go back. Everyone's following. I hope everyone's following. This is very, very explained nice. I like it. Everyone's following? Everyone's following? All right. Hope everyone's following. From Nietzsche's point of view, as well as that of pagan morality, humility and resignation before the enemy, hostile invading forces, are synonymous with weakness. Humility and resignation, these are the values of traditional morality, but particularly, they are the Christian values. But how can what is humiliating become a criterion of virtue or resignation, a criterion of wisdom? I kind of want to go back a little bit. Oh, I fucked up by moving the page again. To read the two passages so we can see what Klossowski is talking about. He opens, what is inherited is not the sickness, but sickliness, the lack of strength to resist the danger of infections, the broken resistance, morally speaking, resignation and meekness in the face of the enemy. And then at the end, he says, two totally different states confounded, the calm of strength, essentially forbearance from reaction, type of the gods whom nothing moves, and calm of exhaustion, rigidity to the point of anesthesia. All philosophic aesthetic procedures aim at the second and really intend the former, for they attribute predicates to the attained state as if a divine state had been attained. As Klossowski's rereading this, as he's going through this and this kind of hermeneutic, looping and finding internal contradictions in this fragment's sequential structure that stands out to him, and it will stand out, I think, as a thing. It does to me after reading it. There's a play that this is not just simply playing with language. This isn't, as Nietzsche might say, philology, right? This isn't just like observing the interplay of certain words in certain places. There's actually philosophical claims being made here. And for Klossowski, it's about how Nietzsche's diagnostic framework is constitutively aporic, that the criteria of health and morbidity can't be stabilized in a single piece of text from Nietzsche, and that there's a reason for that. So Nietzsche's two propositions, as I read, one is that you have an inability to resist these harmful invasions, and that is weakness and evil. This is structurally compatible with Christian or pagan morality. The moral subject, the subject of a king, the subject of a human subject, is put in a position where they cannot resist, and their capacity to resist is how we value them. So health equals resistance here. Then the second is lack of resistance, if we call it resignation and humility, is the traditional virtue. But the criterion sort of shifts. Acceptance of weakness becomes a positive one, as the way that Nietzsche is going through it. So these fragments, and this is all one continuous. One sec. Sorry, kids are hilarious. I think they're hilarious. Everyone's got their own opinion. The evaluation of weakness and non-resistance from different positions, failure or virtue, the way that these things come together, the way that they interplay, is sort of centered here. It's very much centered here. Yeah, I think that's what I would... It's very much centered in this. I feel like just sort of reading at this point because it's a lot. It's a lot here. Thank you, 92. Thank you, 92. Put that back in place. We'll keep going. What we have here are two reactions which are evaluated differently. For if Nietzsche merely means to say that the good of the agent is measured in terms of its resistance to harmful invasions, which thereby affirms the strength of its will, he would be in complete agreement with traditional morality. But what Nietzsche wants to demonstrate is precisely that the latter is a weakness. Well, what then are the harmful invasions? Impulses? But is not the will to power the supreme impulse? How and since when could it be harmful for Nietzsche? No doubt he means that the absence or cessation of the strength necessary to resist what is harmful to existence, the strength and henceforth the instinct for conservation, having just disappeared in the individual, provoked a censure that became more severe as the non-resistance became more common or more frequent. We will see below that he takes up and develops this motif of invasions and the morality it provokes. This is all very clear to me, like straight up clear, like language. If it's not to anyone, I'm happy to go back through, but this is like, there's not a lot of super deep things. He is doing the explanation, and I don't feel like putting a hat on a hat. I feel like I'd be putting a hat on a hat by explaining the explanation. Let me know if I'm wrong, because it's entirely possible that I'm overreading it and I'm too comfortable with it, and I'm very bad at this job. So if you have a question, now would be the time. I'll sit here awkwardly as long as I have to. Okay. But here again, Nietzsche's reflections become more ambiguous in the last paragraphs, see the note bene, where he imputes to morality, as a task it imposes, the weakening of desires, the desires of the will to power. And since desire and the will to power are obviously positive for Nietzsche, it seems that one point of view is substituted for another point of view in the same fragment. The first was that strength consisted in resisting harmful invasions. The second, that weakness had to give way to the will to power manifest in the desire. There's so much here. This one is going to be a lot to go through. Thus, the criteria of health and morbidity have varied not only because there are differences in degree between one state of existence and another, this aspect of the fragment is more straightforward and clear, but also because Nietzsche himself, in wanting to prove that traditional morality is the negation of life, continues to hesitate on the question of what constitutes the power and impotence of living. Thus, he is unable to decide for himself what is harmful. Okay. Desire here and the will to power are being used in Klossowskian senses. It's actually really important that we sort of take a moment on that. This is not one's wants, not really. This is the forces behind the wants, the forces behind the not wants, the forces behind action, the forces behind effort, these things that are sort of driving through it, right? So when he says one point of view substituted for another point of view in the same fragment, it is a very precise and sort of, sharp way to talk about it. He's not saying that it's contradictory, not really anymore. Contradiction would mean that there's like a co-presence of opposed claims in the framework. One point of view is substituted for another point of view in this fragment. This is the shift that he's arguing Nietzsche's making in this. Right? That he's starting from one and moving to another. It is not contradictory as a thing. That's not what it's doing. Right? Is there a difference between Klossowski's impulses and D&G's desire? Obviously, or they'd use the same terms, and one of them would say, like Klossowski's impulses, or like Deleuze's desire. There's obviously different interplays of them. There's more in common in how they behave than, say, libido or personal wanting and personal desire. We're specifically staying in the space of like how, we're staying in Klossowski's space. So when he's using desire, he is talking about it in his space specifically. And he's talking about desire and the will to power in terms of how Nietzsche sort of talked through it, right? That how Nietzsche has been talking about this evaluative framework and how he's doing this odd transition. We'll break it up. The first was that strength consisted in resisting harmful invasions. You could sort of say it's a conservative or old school biological standpoint, that integrity is defined by an organism's capacity to maintain boundaries. Does anyone recognize that from any politicians? That thing is there. Health is resistance and power of resistance. The enemy is anything that threatens stability, basically. Anything that threatens the harmonious organization of these things, right? This is compatible as a thing overall with traditional morality and how they sort of deal with the virtuous subject. A person is good who resists temptation, right? Who loves pure and chaste from afar, who maintains mastery over themselves. They don't surrender to their impulses or their base instincts, right? The second point of view that he's talking about is a different one, very much. It's an affirmative, intensive standpoint. So this is going to be closer to what you're asking, Voxy. Like, there are impulses within all of us and sort of at the base layer of things, right? The will to power for this is the supreme drive, the will to power, the will to overcome, the supreme drive. Desire would be an expression of vital energies overflowing. It's vital energies overflowing is kind of how, like, desire is the elan vital, the power of life that exists and overflows categorical capture. And so it is the passions is another way to talk about it. Passions. There's a reason we tend to think of passions as unbridled. It's the thing that overflows. That's the sort of play that we're making. Anything that opposes desire, which would be moralization of weakness, would actually be a symptom of impotence. So in this categorization, health is, instead of being sort of this stability of sort of the organism, it would be about the free productive expression of will, right? The enemy would be that which inhibits, which weakens, which suppresses desire and suppresses the impulses and the will. So this move, this substitution that's being made, isn't really announced in the paper because they're using the same vocabulary. Nietzsche's using the same vocabulary for both. He's talking about weakness. He's talking about strength. He's talking about things that are harmful, things that can resist or can't resist. And the content he's loading them with is incredibly incompatible. And it's not really inconsistency. We can talk about it that way, but that's not really what, especially not what Klossowski is claiming Nietzsche is doing. There's instead a structural problem in how the will to power itself can be theorized. Is there a principle of self-maintenance, which is like resistance? Or do we theorize it as this principle of self-expenditure, which is as I was saying, the affirming that overflow as a thing? And this is what we're going with. Klossowski's going to be diagnosing it because both of these are in Nietzsche's texts, and you can't eliminate either. Like, not easily, certainly. Right? Thus, the criteria of health and morbidity have varied. Yeah, we're going to do it. Thus, the criteria of health and morbidity have varied not only because there are differences in degree between one state of existence and another. This aspect of the fragment is more straightforward and clear, but also because Nietzsche himself, in wanting to prove that traditional morality is the negation of life, continues to hesitate on the question of what constitutes the power and impotence of living. Thus, he is unable to decide for himself what exactly is harmful. That's a hell of a single sentence, isn't it? God damn, that's a single sentence. Where do instinctual drives? That's not really a thing. Instinctual drives would be a post hoc justification of some drives as not instinctual or as not base or as more intellectual or as less animalistic. Instinctual drives are one of those things that's like, that doesn't happen. There isn't like a part of the brain that's like, here's instinct. Instead, the way that, and as far as I know, CogSci backs this up generally these days. But instead of thinking about it as like, oh, here's the instinct, it's in that section of the brain. Brains don't grow like that. Instead, it's neurons and positionality, as well as the complex interaction of the growth of the entire organism that generates those things. And so instinctual drives are more about the cleanest way that an apparatus that is developed in nature operates. So instinctual drives, it's not naturally that way, because there's no drive. It's very difficult to talk about some drives as being natural and others not. Very difficult to have that conversation. Very difficult to go down that road. So we open here. It's just a long sentence. Klossowski's sort of talking about two, sources of ways to talk about health and morbidity. They're one state of existence and another. This aspect of the fragment more straightforward and clear, but also because he's talking about sort of this unproblematic one way, right? The Bernard thing we went through and talked through. If health and sickness are differences in degree, then criteria is itself inherently something that is, self-internal and scalar. There isn't really a sharp threshold or fall off. Things that are healthy may not be healthy to others. It's a contextual, constitutional thing. Oh shit. Jello Biafra's in the hospital, had a stroke. Damn. I was just talking about dead Kennedys the other day. I watched a horrifyingly awful video. Someone who was saying that the dead Kennedys have betrayed punk rock. Purity testing 40-year-old punk bands we're running out of stuff to judge people. We need to find more things to shame. We need to find many more things to shame if we're going for dead Kennedys. The system of health, when we're talking about this way, is again contextual. And this works in a thing where we're talking about floating norms and degrees of variation. The criteria will shift and vary, like by location, by person, by everything, because the phenomena that underlie them are continuous, right? It has nothing to do with the theorist being confused. One person in one position understanding health one way versus another and the other side of the world in a completely different context. It doesn't mean that one is confused over the other. The phenomena shift, criteria vary, right? As a thing. The more problematic kind, Jello Biafra, sing of the Dead Kennedy Nazi punks fuck off. Dead Kennedy's wonderful. Go listen to them on Spotify. Just great. Just fucking great. They have like 2 really good albums. They have a lot of good albums. They have 2 really good albums. Most of you may know them from Tony Hawk Pro Skater, if you're my age. If you don't know them on their own. So that's one way as a thing. The problem is that Nietzsche talks another way, because he is hesitating, and he's kind of done this a lot. He does this a lot in his later writings. Hesitates sort of in this weird way about what the constitution of power and impotence are. This is not vitality built into his theory. He has a motivated instability in what he's doing. Nietzsche's criteria shift because Nietzsche's like rage and anger and commentary on like traditional Christian morality and the morality of the gregarious requires him to operate both with that conservative biological setup as well as the affirmative intensive. And they can't be reconciled. So he has to keep them both. The hesitation is not a theoretical sophistication in Nietzsche. It is unresolved contradictions. And it's within the project Nietzsche's undertaking himself, as far as Klossowski's concerned. There's a phrase in here. He is unable to decide for himself what exactly is harmful. It's kind of a damning comment on Nietzsche, and kind of a fair one. One moment, I'll be right back. I've got a child yelling for me. Holiday in Cambodia is a great song. And sometimes kids are less funny. Was it the use of the N-word or something? No. One of the members of Dead Kennedys ended up growing up into someone who is a complicated semi-right-wing agitator, which apparently makes everyone problematic. So that's how that goes. We need to find different people to shame. We have a weird world. Frustrating bunch of people. I think it was on the last sentence. He's unable to decide for himself what's harmful. Morrissey's a prick, but I still like the Smiths. Yeah. Smith's good. I got it. So I still listen to Michael Jackson. Like, people need to fucking grow the fuck up. Okay. Harmful as Nietzsche's doing this, and as he's commenting on Nietzsche. What is harmful? Harmful is like an operationalized version of unhealthy here, which is really interesting. To be unable to decide what is harmful is losing the very tools needed to do diagnostics at all. So here's Nietzsche doing that, right? Like, Nietzsche's unable to say what's harmful while doing diagnostics, which is kind of, and this phrase is really damning. It's a damning phrase. A physician who can't figure out what's harmful is kind of like compromised, you might say, right? So we're now in a place, this is important for the next bit. Klossowski's kind of, after this last thing, brought us to this position where Nietzsche and his diagnosis of traditional morality applies now to Nietzsche. Right? So there's this weird thing that the diagnostician here is exhibiting symptoms that they are diagnosing. They are themselves closed as a loop. Kink and Biscuit can go to hell too. I mean, really? We can fight over the biscuit, but cake? Cake is amazing. All right. So that's where we're at. We've now turned everything we've talked about onto Nietzsche. Pointedly, too. And then we're going to have some really, really pointed Klossowski channeling Bataille and a handful of other things here, where he's actually making a lot of pretty extreme statements here that are going to be a lot. It is, one second, where'd my pen go? Shit. Oh, there you are. Good. Really? You're just going to do that? Come on. All right. It is excess that makes manifest that which exists. Power cannot not be produced in order to prove that it exists. This is such a good line. I might spend too much time on this line. You guys just tell me if I'm spending too much time on this line, because this is like, I think this is like one of the more, I think this is a great line. There is a lot happening here. So let's start with like the double negation, which is awkward to be read. Power cannot not be produced, right? This is not like a stylistic, poetic redundancy. This is a claim that has excessive ontological weight, especially with what we're talking about with Nietzsche here. You'll understand that in a second. It is not that power tends to produce itself or generally discharges into the world. Power necessarily produces itself. That's what power does. Power exerts into the world. Production is not optional. It is constitutive of what it means to be powerful. And unexpended power is not quiet power. It's not power. Power cannot not be produced in order to prove that it exists. It is an awkward sentence, but that's the point. That's the point. For Nietzsche, go back to genealogy. When we talk about the noble type, right, the aristocratic noble type, these people are characterized in Nietzsche by spontaneous activity, right? That they act from their own fullness. They don't have external provocation. They don't have a defined enemy. They aren't reactive. They power expends from them, jumps from them, leaps from them, right? They act from their own fullness. But there's a deeper thing that's happening here that Nietzsche is talking about. And that is that being itself requires production. Existence manifests through, excess. It is excess that makes manifest that which exists. This isn't just a moral, claim. This is ontological and really, really deep. The structure of being is necessarily becoming. Being doesn't persist. Being produces. The will to power is not a property of beings. It is the manner in which beings become. I really like this. It's sometimes, once in a while, there's just a sentence that just cuts through. So it is excess that makes manifest that which exists. This is Bataille, by the way. If you haven't read Bataille, I suggest it. Accursed Share is excellent. Accursed Share is just excellent. There's literally 500 versions of it uploaded on this server in various places, to say the least. To say the least. Josh says, Nietzsche can't produce a final stable criterion of harm because the authority that would decide the subject is itself a fiction, the self a theater of competing impulses. But Klossowski doesn't treat this as a failure or contradiction in Nietzsche. Rather, he thinks Nietzsche is deliberately exposing the illusion that we could ever have stable moral standpoint. It's very well said, Josh. And whether true or not, I don't think it matters. I think the statement and the critique that Klossowski's making is so fucking next level. It's so fucking next level because the critique here, and it's one of the things I really like. Let's go back to Bataille really quick because I did move past that a little bit quickly. Bataille talks about the problem of an economy is not scarcity. Problem of an economy is always excess. That every living ecosystem, every economy, and he's speaking about it as general economy, it's a whole thing, like everything at once. The challenge is that they always have to produce more energy than they can use for growth and reproduction. If you produce less, you shrink. Humanity hasn't been shrinking, by the way. That's not really a thing we do. Some people have that issue. There is starvation in various places. There's also exceptional overabundance in others. So it's less about scarcity. There's overproduction. There's excess. It's the way it works. And this excess has to be spent. You don't just pile excess up and hang out. Various societies handle it in a lot of different ways. A lot. We do it by killing people. That's America's version of that. It's one of the many ways we do it. But war is a big one for us. We like it. Existence itself is structurally committed to handling expenditure. And so when Klossowski says power cannot not be produced in order to prove it exists, that is a compressed version of necessary expenditure. Power must be produced. Power can't hold itself back. This is the mistake. There's no self-chosen celibate. You just don't have the power. That's it. And we've claimed it's good because it doesn't exist that way. Klossowski in this sentence is being critical. It isn't really celebratory as a thing, as much as I'm sounding super excited about it and seem to be celebrating the sentence. It's just because I really think we're getting to the good stuff. If excess is constitutive of existence, then it actually can't serve as a criteria for healthy or powerful. Excess is everywhere. Everything is excess. We have an extraordinary amount of it, right? Morbid nervous discharges in the exhausted type versus the Dionysian, right? Just to go to Nietzsche a little bit, like all of it is power expended. The claim that undermines diagnostic frameworks is precisely the excess that is the condition of existence. It isn't a privilege of the strong. The power was in you, Captain Planet kind of shit.
Yeah.
Like it's that's what it is. Go for it, Alex.
Yeah, this is very much, and I'm sorry for bringing this up a lot because I know Deleuze is not really a phenomenologist. I know Nietzsche was not a phenomenologist either, but this is very much reminding me of Jaspers, Binswanger, Bost, sort of Heideggerian, Jaspersian psychotherapeutic tradition of like focusing on the individual's experience rather than assuming the diagnostic biological reductionism. It's from a phenomenological angle, but it reminds me very much of the idea that you cannot reduce psychopathology to or diagnostic biological causation.
Yes, and I would add just one thing. Describing something phenomenologically doesn't necessarily mean you're making a phenomenological play. It's one of the things that I've found myself caught up in quite a bit, because I'm definitely not in that school. Deleuze has done this on occasion. Klossowski does definitely do this. He plays more of the poetic, prosaic sort of style of writing. The playing at the phenomenology of it in order to break it down, in order to play it down, I think is a more complicated play. But yeah, it's a really interesting claim across the board. I'm completely with you. It's really fascinating. And it just from here just gets, I think, great. Because I'm just going to keep going. Unless anyone has a thing, I'll wait for a moment. But if excess is merely an exaggerated state, a magnification of a normal state, then what is a normal state? If the terms morbid and healthy are simply defined as differences in degree between one state and another, and as so many nuances made manifest in the fact of existing, where can we situate ourselves in order to avoid making completely arbitrary decisions about whether something is strong or weak? Sometimes his writing's very clear. Sometimes his writing's very clear. From what is our vantage point? What is our perspective that could possibly be a distinction between strong and weak? Could we see the distinction between strong and weak without running into the same exact circularity that Nietzsche just displayed for us, as Klossowski's putting it, that Nietzsche's showing us that there is this circular logic, viciously circular logic, that's sort of at the base of this. The problem is structurally identical to like classic skeptic challenges, right? Every evaluation requires a standard. Every standard requires perspective. Every perspective is itself some semblance of a position that has like skin in the game. So you can't actually escape circularity here. What is the vicious circle for Klossowski? We're getting closer. We're getting closer to the conspiracy of the vicious circle, not the eternal returns. Conspiracy of the vicious circle. We'll get there. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. Don't worry. We're getting there. We're getting there, Josh's. This is not, for Klossowski, I think, as simple as saying that there's a a relativism, though. He's playing with a very particular instability that isn't simply like we don't know where we stand, but instead the distinction between strong and weak, that it's not built into phenomena at a level that's prior to our own interpretation. Right? The mentioning Bernard, which is what Nietzsche does, it brings up a thesis and plays into a thesis that plays with and fucks with that ontological floor we had. There's no such thing called health that is waiting to be found and identified. The numbers on your chart don't have to be a certain thing. That's not how it works. Instead, all of these things are ultimately like a continuum of states. Health is a name we apply to states that seem good, like useful, that don't seem to be harming us, that are productive, according to some standard that is part of the evaluative process itself. Again, that fucking circle. He has a phrase in here where we can situate ourselves in order to avoid making completely arbitrary decisions about whether something is strong or weak. The arbitrary decisions is being pointed at what Nietzsche is doing here. And again, this is critique and criticism and insult, like all of this at once, I think intentionally, to make the point, I think, hit a bit harder. If Klossowski's right that health and morbidity distinctions can't be stabilized, then Nietzsche's proposed replacement values are just as arbitrary as well. They're just as arbitrary as well, right? The genealogist has undermined his structure of both old and new values. And we'll get into why in just a moment as a thing. In another fragment from the same period, Nietzsche again returns to the same theme in order to establish a more precise distinction between what is morbid or healthy, this time in terms of the real or false symptoms of power, and hence in terms of the impotence that exists beneath the appearance of strength. It is an exact demonstration a contrario in relation to the previous fragment, but as in the latter, the digression begins with what is haunting Nietzsche himself, his own heredity. Above, he had already declared that what is hereditary is the morbid state, and not sickness. Every fragment that Klossowski's bringing up here, that he's going to be relating and showing how these things sort of play against each other, right? This is Klossowski, again, building out a very particular argument of how Nietzsche is working to make these sort of claims. Every fragment, regardless of whatever subject matter, is ultimately a meditation on Nietzsche's own case, on his singular case. The movement from theoretical, the criterion of health and morbidity, to this autobiographical, am I the strong or the exhausted type? Which is the one he's talking about here. This is not diversion. This is not an aside. This is the actual stakes of this chapter we're talking about. The four criteria that we're talking about, decadence, vigor, gregariousness, and the singular case, are not abstract types. They're not abstract categories. These are instruments for answering intensely personal question for Nietzsche that the vicious circle makes unanswerable. This claim that what is hereditary is the morbid state, not a sickness. What is hereditary is the morbid state, not sickness, is showing up here again for a reason. Klossowski's connecting these fragments all the way back, pushing it back. The first opening up with this thing. The second takes it up from the angle of like what sickliness produces when it imitates gestures of health. The hereditary morbid state is the shared ground for all of these. And no matter how laden he may be, to continue, no matter how laden he may be with harmful heredity, Nietzsche by no means interprets this as a heredity weakness, as the cause of the supreme values. But does this mean that the weakness should clothe itself? Clothe itself Jesus Christ, what's with me today? Cloth itself? Is that what I fucking said? But does this mean that this weakness would clothe itself in the forms and explosions of a fallacious power? What he fears is that he will wind up as a type of human open to the most dangerous misunderstandings. This is what the other fragment is entitled, The Most Dangerous Misunderstanding. Okay, we're about to do a whole bunch more fucking Nietzsche. Whole bunch more Nietzsche here. Like a whole bunch more. And I'm going to try to get it through again in a... Do my best to make it through all of this before I finish up today, because it's going to be a lot. But this is the other piece that, the other fragment that we were just sort of alluding to as a thing. Shit, this is going to be a lot. Let's give it a shot. We'll try to do each section, and we'll do like a mini explainer for each of these little phrases. And again, bursting through, because the point is to get through it so we can get to the next page. I mean, ultimately, that's the hope. For me, it's the fucking hope. Maybe not for everyone else, but for me, it's the hope that I can get to at least a little bit more. Yeah, we're not near the end of the chapter yet. I'm going to try to get through the entire analysis on this, though. That's 2 pages. That's going to be a lot. Well, we might go over a little bit today. So be it. So be it. So be it. So be it. Like the stream, subscribe, give money, all that fun stuff. Okay. Fuck. The most dangerous misunderstanding. One concept apparently permits no confusion or ambiguity, that of exhaustion. Exhaustion can be acquired or inherited. In any case, it changes the aspect of things, the value of things. So, you're noticing what Klossowski's talking about? Hey, this thing we're about to talk about, this fragment, kind of does a little bit different. But wait, there's reasons for it. There's reasons for it. We'll get there. As opposed to those who, from the fullness they represent and feel, involuntarily give to things and see them fuller, more powerful and pregnant with the future, who at least are able to bestow something, the exhausted diminish and botch all they see. They impoverish the value. They are harmful. I appreciate this sentence a bit. This is like straight stuff from like Zarathustra, right? The fullness of the last man, the fullness that they feel. Zarathustra talked about this a lot. The reactive person who's always full might have to do with a handful of other full things. The fullness they represent and feel, involuntarily give to things, see them fuller. The exhausted types' cognitive distortion of the world, the way that they deal with things, as Nietzsche's sort of commenting here. Alone, thank you very much. Absolutely love you, and thank you very much. This type of cognition is like someone who sees the world in bad faith, that they're already depleted, already in this position. So the world is too. The way he's playing with this is like Schopenhauerian pessimism, that the will can't affirm things anymore. They are exhausted. The people are exhausted. This is a play in that way. And when he says that they are harmful, he is really specifically calling back to language. There's no solar anuses on the Klossowski stream. Sorry. That's AO. The exhausted type is harmful as an invader, right? This is the same language. We're touching back into that language. Klossowski preloaded us to consider that for a fucking reason. So I'm making sure we do it. This is the point. In fragment 1, the question was like, what constituted harmful was invasion of the individual. And here he's actually saying, no, it's harmful to life itself. They're not harmful to themselves, but to this greater, larger economy of existence, to life. They're invaders of life. They drain, not enrich. They take, they don't give. They diminish what they touch. They don't impregnate to allow to grow. Yeah. About this, no mistakes seem possible, yet history contains the gruesome fact that the exhausted have always been mistaken for the fullest, and the fullest for the most harmful. I may have taken this, my essay tomorrow that's coming out, it's like an hour and a half long, and I'm sorry about that, is literally about this, and it's this phrasing, because I really appreciate, and I think that there is actually a lot of value to be taken from this type of claim. There's no equanimity in how Nietzsche is saying this. He's very clear. He's like, it is this thing. This is a monstrous, fundamental corruption at the root of all cultural valuations that have happened. And it is huge. He is saying, always. Now, this is not my culture. Always. Right? The saint, the brilliant, the capitalist, like that kind of, they're taken for the highest type, right? The dangerous creator, the one who is outside of what can be handled by society. These are dangerous. They threaten established forms. These are harmful to society, but not harmful like in Nietzsche's terms. He's playing with these. The history of culture is the history of this inversion, the triumph within the system of the exhausted types evaluation over the full types, actual superiority. And there's going to be some really specific language that we're going to be touching into when Klossowski touches into the word gruesome fact. If this inversion is structural and not an accident of time, if it characterizes all the evaluative histories of things, then it's not correctable by genealogical exposure. Nietzsche can demonstrate saints and ascetics were exhausted types, but it's just also a process of the same consciousness that exists with the same evaluative economy, subject to the same inversions. We just went through this. This is the circle. The genealogist who unmacks the exhausted type is not automatically positioned amongst full types. There's a reflexive trap here that a fragment cannot escape. I really like this book. Those poor in life, the weak impoverish life. Those rich in life, the strong enrich it. The first are parasites of life. The second give presence to it. How is it possible to confound these two? Obviously semi-rhetorical, but not just that. It's a pretty damning statement. These are some of his more extreme statements towards the end of things. And it's the parasites of life. He's using like biological claims. He's not even talking about that there's like a vital economy it's failing to enrich. No, they're parasites. They extract energy from the surplus of the full type's production, right? That's what they do. They pull from these things. The strong, they give presence. They recast. He recasts here gift giving as a virtue at the level of species, and it's fascinating to see Nietzsche do this. When the exhausted appear with the gesture of the highest activity and energy, when degeneration affected an excess of spiritual and nervous discharge, they were mistaken for the rich. They excited fear. The cult of the fool is always the cult of those rich in life, the powerful. The fanatic, the possessed, the religious epileptic, all eccentricities have been experiences as the highest types of power, as divine. They excited fear. I think I want to actually take the first part of this up front. So let's get back to highlighting so people know what the fuck I'm talking about. When the exhausted appeared with the gesture of highest activity and energy, when degeneration affected an excess of spiritual and nervous discharge, they were mistaken for the rich. They excited fear. The physiological mechanism that we're talking about here, excess nervous discharge, right? That's being played with. It's not an expression of surplus force. It's a breakdown of depleted regulatory faculties. When degeneration affected an excess of spiritual and nervous discharge, they were mistaken for the rich. They excited fear. He's talking about, again, the looks like. And again, when we're talking about this is very similar to like a parent movement in Anti-Oedipus. This is not people are mistaken of the truth. It's like a magic trick. It's not a magic trick's a lie if you want to really get into some weird ethical claim. But if I happen to make a card disappear, or if suddenly something's not in my hand, you are tricked by the apparent movement. You're tricked by what the thing looks like, the perceptive sort of consequences of the thing. It doesn't matter if the card disappeared or not. That's how it's experienced, how it's seen. And so this nervous excess discharge looks like the overflow of genuine vital richness. Both the full type and the degenerate produce this striking high amplitude output, this excessive sort of thing that excites fear. Fear is the social register of power. What is feared is what seems to be the most powerful, the most beyond ordinate controls. The degenerate who produces this crazy irregular output is feared because fear is calibrated about intensity of output. So high intensive output reacts to that. It's not an underlying source of that output. He's giving a genealogy or a source and process that we find this inversion taking place. Right? So he says, and it goes on, the cult, now let me switch colors. The cult of the fool is always the cult of those rich in life, the powerful, the fanatic, the possessed, the religious epileptic. All eccentricities have been experienced as the highest types of power, as divine. The cult of the fool is a really particular reference. This is like old Russian Byzantine Christianity as a thing. A fool, in this case, the jester, if you don't know the history of like the jester and the fool, they basically exist as a transgressive center for rational social norms. And they're always in proximity to the divine. Their job is to be uninhibited and unpredictable beyond the codes of everyone else. And in that way, they are always in contact with what lies beyond those codes. So the cult of the fool is always the cult of those rich in life and the powerful. Nietzsche then lists and says the fanatic, possessed, religious epileptic, all eccentricities is like the cultural forms of this nervous discharge that has been misread as divine contact. A fanatic, these are great words for these things. I fucking love it. The fanatic is the conviction that overrides one's own calculations, that is prudent and smart and on top of shit, right? Any social regulatory apparatus that they have in them is gone. The fanatical prophet appears to people on the outside as calibrated by ordinary social behavior, because that's where you are, to be in contact with extraordinary sources of force, because they're beyond what you understood. They are intensity. The possessed, again, same thing. The religious epileptic, think of those who speak in tongues, maybe less interesting these days. Once upon a time, people would have absolute fits while God contacted them. People believe the epileptics like literally were like touched by God. These are the eccentricities that have been experienced as the highest types of power, as divine. Right? If you ever want to read about the fool, you can read Dostoevsky's The Idiot, which I think does a really nice job of sort of talking about the epileptic, the jester, and all of these things. Like, Nietzsche loved Dostoevsky, so my money is he's talking about Mishkin, but I'm not positive. That's my speculation. But even if it's my speculation, if you want to understand that sentence, I think The Idiot is a great way to go about it. So does Deleuze, by the way. So does Deleuze. So to continue. No, Brooks, that's not the right thing I want to do at all. This kind of strength that excites fear was considered preeminently divine. Here was the origin of authority. Here one interpreted, heard, and sought wisdom. This led to the development almost everywhere of a will to deify, a will to the typical degeneration of spirit, body, and nerves, an attempt to find the way to this higher level of being. The origin of authority here, it's such an interesting consideration. There's a genetic, genealogical, historical, sociological, whatever claim here in like the strongest sense. The misrecognition of the degenerate excess. And again, degenerate this is not an ethical claim. He's making it in that same, do you remember the graph? I don't want to keep going back to that. I'm using the words from that. He's using the words from that. Klossowski will too. Just get used to it. The degenerate excess is mistaken as divine power. This is not something that is really contingent to our time or Nietzsche's time or Klossowski's time. This is the generative concept of authority itself. Authority exists as a thing like originating in fear. Fear originates and appears sort of against power. The perception that more power or dangerous power or unbridled power, this intensity of output that exists there. This exists in this cultural and religious domain, right? That, as he's reading it, is kind of about this nervous degeneration. So authority as cultural politics exists, is genealogically rooted in this fucking mistaken systematic misrecognition. So here's the phrase. Here was the origin of authority. Here one interpreted, heard, and sought wisdom. This is what authority was. Here one interpreted through omens, through signs, through divinity and God talking to them, through the events of history, through one heard, again, the authority who hears the divine, hears the voice of God, hears what they should be doing. They sought wisdom, the authority as the one who knows what to do and can guide us with metaphysical knowledge given to them by God. All three of these things that exist as he's laying them out are, in his words, misrecognized degeneration. A shaman, a witch doctor, a prophet, a sage, all of these are figures whose degenerate excess discharge becomes institutionalized as interpretive, as audible, as connected to sapient actual authority. This led to the development almost everywhere of a will to deify, a will to the typical degeneration of spirit, body, and nerves. The will to deify is a really interesting concept in later Nietzsche. And it really is going to be important as we go through sort of the rest of the book. This is not a desire for union with God. That's not what it means, to deify. It is a will to produce in oneself the physiology of divinity, right? It's not the will to deify someone else. That's is not really. It's more the will to deify. The will to deify, just like the will to truth, is the will to produce, to make sure truth is being produced. The will to truth. These things are, for Nietzsche, always sort of contingent, evolutionary, sociological, gregarious things. These larger systems. The ascetic program, the program of the ascetics, as he talks about it in this light, is not really a path towards divine contact at all. Instead, it is self-destructive technology for artificially inducing symptoms of the very degeneration that has been culturally misidentified as divinity itself. This is about deliberate exhaustion in pursuit of the appearance of fullness. It's a great critique, I believe. And he continues, to make oneself sick, mad, to provoke the symptoms of derangement and ruin. That was taken for becoming stronger, more superhuman, more terrible, wiser. One thought that in this way, one became so rich in power that one could give from one's fullness. Wherever one adored, one sought one who could give. I'd like the phrasing of this. I like this. This is the God who you worship is the one from whose surplus the worshiper hopes to receive. So the ascetic divine type is adored because they seem to be full. And as such, they promise, by existing as they do, an inexhaustible source of gift, life, excess. This is the entire institution of religion, and it's structured around this misrecognition that positions this exhausted, degenerate type as a locus of surplus by the same mistake. Very much. Here, the experience of intoxication proved misleading. This increases the feeling of power in the highest degree, therefore, naively judged, power itself. On the highest rung of power, one places the most intoxicated, the ecstatic. There are two sources of intoxication, the overgreat fullness of life and a state of pathological nourishment of the brain. I love this shit. Let's talk about the setups here. Got kind of two sources of this, right? And this is like closing a loop almost. Like, remember the other one? This is like closing a loop again. But Nietzsche's pushing against it. There's an interesting play here. Nietzsche's not saying, therefore the ecstatic is always exhausted. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying, oh yeah, therefore intoxication is always morbid. He's not connecting things in that way. Instead, he's talking about there being two sources. There are two sources of intoxication, the overgreat fullness of life and a state of pathological nourishment of the brain. The overgreat fullness of life is, to use Nietzsche's later terms, it's Dionysian overflow. It is intensity of existence at a productive richness that is filled with excess. If you've ever been in a creative process and lost yourself in it and you simply can't stop, that is the overgratefulness of life. You've experienced it. And I hope you have, because it's a wonderful, stunning feeling. Zizek talks about it when it's that Big Think video that I adore when he says happiness is a conformist category. When you are truly creating and you're in it, you're ready to suffer, to die, just to make sure the thing finishes. Nietzsche very much would agree with this statement. This is Dionysian overflow. This is the thing when you're working towards an insight that you're building towards, when it doesn't have to be grand. When you're working towards getting better at a video game, when you're working towards learning a math sort of situation when you're practicing a thing and you finally nail it there, you can't stop. This is the thing. This is the state of creation that like Nietzsche writes about and talks about with Beethoven, the intoxication that he claims for himself even, which is going to be important in a little bit. That's the deal. Second source of intoxication, the state of pathological nourishment of the brain. Okay. This is different. This is intoxication is going to be, I think, important for both of these. Neither of these are like rational states. Like when you're like what I said with Zizek, when you're doing a thing, when I'm writing and I fucking figure a thing out, or when I'm playing a game and I'm in the zone, it's intoxicating. And it's not intoxicating in, I think there's a lot of colloquial senses, but you are like lost in the thing. There's no rationality in there, right? The second one is the toxic intoxication that degeneration produces. The brain, the locus of all of these things, becomes improperly nourished. And it does this from exhaustion. It does this from, I don't know, weakness in some capacity, from intoxicating substances as a thing, right? Deleuze writes about this as well. Like these produce a dysregulated output. And that output, it seems to be sort of ecstatic. If you haven't been drunk, if you haven't been high, if you haven't done drugs, if you haven't had this experience, it feels that. The number of times when I was younger that I was certain I lost myself in, I got stoned to shit and I would suddenly be certain that I solved all of humanity's problems. It feels like ecstasy. Taking ecstasy feels like ecstasy. This is the degenerate prophet. This is the fanatic, the religious epileptic. This situation, both of these, they don't feel different really. That's kind of his point, is they don't really feel or seem different. They are basically identical. They're basically identical. And it's an incredibly odd moment because remember, Nietzsche's writing this. Nietzsche doesn't say this one's mine. He doesn't like go, oh yeah, and I'm not that one. This is like weirdly flow state versus fucked up state. And if you've ever taken the right drugs, they feel identical. Or had the mental position to feel identical. Again, this is the point. Like Nietzsche's not saying which one he is. This is a guy who absolutely would, if he believed he could. Nietzsche was not afraid to have these conversations. Right? You know that. Nietzsche would not. Nietzsche had no issue with arrogance. He would say shit. But there's a weird way that this ends where it's like vulnerable. I read it as vulnerable, where he is not diagnosing his own case and he's actively going through these things right then. Like that's yeah. It's a lot. I read this. I read deep into this one. This one I feel at a really crazy level. It's a lot. We'll get to Klossowski and his analysis of it. I kind of want to actually maybe, because if I start that, I've got to go. We'll do that next week. This has been 2 hours, and I think this is a good place to sort of hold. And next week, start attacking sort of the way that it works and the way that it comes together. What about rushes of energy and ecstasy that don't seem to be connected to religious ideas, drugs, or substance, but also more generally, not necessarily connected to anything inspiration? That we'll get to that. I want to say we'll get to that. Because one of the things that he's sort of getting at right here, specifically with Nietzsche, is that Nietzsche had this incredible experience at Saint-Marie that broke him and shifted how he was talking about stuff. And as he began writing, he began identifying the problems with his own writing and his own thought, and then demonstrated them. Like the fragments architecture that we just went through, right, is actually the content to pay attention here. As much as I do really like the wording in it, we open with like this idea of the concept of exhaustion, right? So it seems like it's going to be doing this diagnostic clarity moment where he's defining it. I mean, that's how I would read it. Like that's fucking how I think I did read it. He's going to be doing this. What is exhaustion? The concept apparently permits Stoic view that of exhaustion. Exhaustion can be acquired or inherited. In any case, it changes that value of things. Blah, blah. Oh, there we go. And then he kind of goes through and demonstrates historically through all of these different sort of things about the fool and the way that these people exist at different times. And he's like, well, actually, here's how exhaustion has been misrecognized as fullness, which is like a social anthropological documentation of this inversion. And then he moves through the explanatory set before he finishes off, right? He goes through, he's like, oh, this thing produces this is how it works. And then he talks about the two sources of this discharge. And the thing is, he says that they're phenomenologically indistinguishable. This clarity of exhaustion by the end of the fragment dissolves back into undecidability at the level of specific case. There's a self-consummation that is happening in this that is going to be the focus of kind of how to consider this, right? As he makes his way through, he ends in a place. He starts with the most dangerous misunderstanding and then doesn't resolve it, right? Like, it's the most dangerous misunderstanding. The most dangerous misunderstanding. Ending with, yeah, I guess, yeah, it's hard to tell what's going on. And he's not going to answer, by the way, not in writing. He's not going to be able to answer this. And he is writing this from that position. We now know that he's not going to be able to answer it, but we also know that literally these are the months leading up to his full breakdown and where he's just gone. This is interesting. And again, as a mini preview of what we'll be doing next week as we do it, Nietzsche foresaw with a rare premonition the conclusions that posterity would draw from his own demise. He would be counted among those who, through exhaustion, adopt a fallacious attitude of power, who seek to inspire fear through a degenerate pathos, who make themselves sick, mad, who provoke the symptoms of their own ruin, all in order to attain the supreme degree of the superhuman. Just a fucking knife in the chest for Nietzsche. Just a fucking knife in the chest from Nietzsche, to say the least. And that's one of the reasons that I adore the way that he does this. The way Klossowski sort of builds this out and sets this up. I dig the shit out of it. I really do. I like it. I dig it, and I think there's room to be done there. Next week, though, it will be next week. So I thank all of you for joining. I've got a bunch of editing to get to, a bunch of other things that I've got to figure out. And we'll be making our way through essay for tomorrow and then some streams maybe later tonight if I get my editing done in time, because there's a lot of really interesting AI shit and some kind of, I found a lot of Professor Jang stuff. So it may be a brainless stream tonight, which I probably could use. I found a lot of Professor Jang stuff, like a lot that is fucking wacky that he really tried to cull from the internet really badly. Like how the Nazis helped the Freemasons lie about going to the moon. So it's great. At me when Zhang is wrong about anything in Iran. I mean, I can already go through stuff he has said. Again, he's deleted videos. We can go through some of those. He has videos on Iran he did about what would happen within days of the invasion that just didn't fucking happen. So he's been very, very wrong, but when you delete videos that are wrong, you get to be right about everything. It's kind of cool. I prefer to be wrong. I prefer to be wrong, to be seen as wrong, and to get people talking about things. So, you were really deep into saying Iran can't close the Hormuz because they can't. That's the point. That's that their closure of it is actually a systematic closure. They're not closing the Strait of Hormuz. What they do is they threaten things, and then insurance companies don't proffer insurance on boats, and lo and behold, like France is sending destroyers there. Like, it's going to be interesting to watch 92, but yeah, there's a conversation to be had, but another time. And I thank all of you for joining, and join us live, DGQC, at discord.gg/DGQC, or of course, you can support us if you like it. Stream Elements links are in the chat. If you go back and look through the chat, super chats are always welcome. Memberships are great, but the best is patreon.com/DGQC. $5 a month helps a great deal to make sure I can keep doing these. So thank all of you. We will talk soon enough. All right. That should be good.